Hey, it's Tim, and you're in the right place. We're going to get the show underway with this setup from literally just last week in Brooklyn, New York at the Barclays Center. Here's Dexter Henry from the New York Post's sports section to set the table, and we'll talk about it all on the other side.
On the second night of March, there was no mistaking the energy inside the Barclays Center. From the opening tip, the building felt different. Unrivaled brought its semifinals to New York City for the first time, and Brooklyn responded. For one night, women's basketball wasn't just part of the sports conversation. It was the main event. From Liberty loyalists to first-time viewers discovering the league, the building was full long before tip-off. For sports content creator Gigi Spear, the difference is clear.
I think the nature of it being a players-founded league is just evident in every aspect, from how the players feel being here, how the fans feel connected, and even the engagement on social media and non-traditional media platforms. I feel like it's just so obvious that it's created by players, for players too, but definitely for the fans.
Year 2 of Unrivaled feels bigger, louder, and more confident. After stops in Miami and Philadelphia, Brooklyn delivered another statement.
It feels like I'm watching hoops at the park, in the rec center, like real street ball. This has the street ball essence to it, and the women go hard. Don't get it twisted.
But this night wasn't just about basketball. It unfolded against a significant backdrop: ongoing labor negotiations in the WNBA, with a potential work stoppage looming. New York Post women's sports reporter Madeline Kenny says that reality has only heightened the importance of leagues like Unrivaled.
Unrivaled was so paramount in changing the women's basketball landscape, because for years WNBA players would have to go overseas to supplement their income during the off season. But because of Unrivaled, at least more than 40 players now this season have the opportunity to stay stateside, continue to build their brand, and then also build their game. And the product has been better in year 2 than year 1. It continues to grow. There's momentum behind this, and we were seeing it here tonight in Brooklyn specifically, but also in Philly when they took it on the road earlier this season. So, I mean, Unrivaled is changing the landscape in the sense that it is giving more players the opportunity to stay stateside and then also have more visibility during the WNBA offseason.
The game has changed for professional women's basketball players. Now Unrivaled, an independent venture-backed league, is giving them options and potentially leverage.
Having a VC-backed league shows that people are investing in it, and then fans are obviously coming through to watch it too. So it shows a lot of leverage when they go into WNBA, CBA negotiation.
Oh, it undoubtedly gives them leverage because they can show, they can organize. That's the one thing about these women. They will organize, and they can make something shake. So the owners are going to have to get their money up, not their funny up, because mess around and this same crew could probably put on a 5-on-5 league in the summer. It could happen. They'll get the financial backing, trust me. There's tons of money out there waiting to be thrown at women's hoops, and I do think they deserve it. So hopefully they come to a resolution, because I'd love to see WNBA hoops. But you owners better open your purse, open your wallet, get it popping, because they ain't messing around.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, we're not effing around either. How are you, everybody? My name's Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. How are you? Thanks for coming by. We appreciate it, and we are more than happy to bounce back into women's hoops this week as it really is in a major moment as we drop this episode. As you heard there from Dexter Henry at the New York Post's sports section there, literally last week, a major event at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn when Unrivaled, the now second year 3-on-3 pro league that has really kind of taken the women's game by storm, had its semifinals, 4 teams playing a doubleheader on a Monday night in Brooklyn, selling out the joint. 19,000 plus in attendance, network television on TNT. And my, oh my, I mean, it's just a short order. Fun, exciting, down to the wire, Elam scoring at the end. I mean, it's really excellent. And a basketball, by the way, in light blue, which is like, I love the colorfulness of it all. And it really it's something that didn't exist 2 years ago, and is truly an amazing thing to behold. That just how quickly the women's game has rocketed forward after you could make the argument after a good 30 years or so, maybe 40 years of fits and starts. And we're going to talk about all of that stuff with our guests this week, Emma Baccellieri and Jordan Robinson, who have this amazing new book out that I highly recommend. It comes out on the 17th of March. Pre-order it or order it, depending on when you're listening to this show. It's called Court Queens: Celebrate the Players, Teams, and History of Women's Basketball. And it is a gorgeous coffee table book, chock full of photos and great graphic imagery and excellent prose in here, talking about the history of the women's game. Yes, from the earliest days, the peach baskets and the traveling teams playing in bloomers and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it sort of focused on the sort of modern 50 years or so, when the AIAW tried to basically get the women's collegiate game under control and sort of somewhat routinized. The NCAA butting heads with the AIAW and ultimately wresting control of the women's collegiate game in the early 1980s. But we also talk about, very interestingly and deeply in this conversation, the burgeoning pro game, the Women's Basketball League, the WBL, from the late 1970s, early 1980s, members of which we have had conversations with in previous episodes. Please check our archives for those great conversations. The ABL, the American Basketball League. No, not that one with Abe Saperstein from the 1950s, the originator of the three-point shot. No, we're talking about the women's version in 1997 that literally came on the backs of a 1996 women's Olympic gold medal in basketball. And then, sure enough, immediate competition from the big bad NBA with the WNBA around that time as well. And of course, the WNBA has been going, I wouldn't say strong ever since, but certainly has been around ever since. It's probably stronger now than it's ever been, but it's also probably in its most precarious point than it's ever been, because as we record this episode, coming off of a very successful Unrivaled season, which is a complete effort by players and outside private equity investment, you could argue that that's an interesting lever of success, given the current negotiations that are underway for collective bargaining and the like between the players' union and the WNBA league itself. And it's a high order problem, but it's certainly a sign of maturation. But it's clearly call it a point of no return or something along those lines, because the women are here. They're not going away. And by God, they're damn good. And they've got multiple ways of showcasing their talents. Athletes Unlimited had a league for women as well for a period of time. There are lots of different places besides the WNBA that these ladies can go to now, it seems. And it'll be very interesting to see, and depending on when you're listening to this, maybe it's been resolved, maybe it still has yet to be resolved, maybe there'll be a work stoppage or a lockout, we'll see. And again, it's somewhat of a higher order problem, but it surely truly means that not only has the sport and the league arrived, but now it comes with all the mature problems and issues that need to be solved with it. So I couldn't think of a better two ladies to talk to about this moment in time that we're in. And the excuse, of course, is this book, again, called Court Queens. You can get it, like they say, wherever good books are found. You can pre-order it, help the algorithm out there, get these ladies more attention for this book before it's actually released, or on the 17th, you can buy it. And of course, if you'd like to give us some shekels of referral love, just click on one of the links here on the show description, however you're getting this podcast, or on our website, where we post all of our episodes at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Search at this episode. I think it's numbered, 436? And you'll find convenient links there. And those links will take you to our pals at Amazon, where we get some shekels of referral love, and you will get the book in either hardcover or Kindle versions as quickly as humanly possible. when it's released, and that's really soon. And of course, we will have a couple of copies to give away with our famous trivia contest at the end of the show. So listen to the end there, and we will give away, I think, 2 copies. Thank you again to the publishers, Black Dog and Leventhal. If you correctly answer, or the first 2 people to correctly answer the trivia question for this week's show. And as for this week's show, let's get it on, shall we? Here it is, our conversation we had with both Emma and Jordan just last week. Please, as always, enjoy. Let me begin the proceedings by basically giving the 2 of you major kudos, because we see a lot of books and properties and documentaries and all those kinds of things. And I must tell you, this is probably the coolest book that I've seen, at least in the last 6 months, if not more. So you've done a really excellent job of taking the story, if you will, of women's basketball, and we'll get to some of the nooks and crannies, into, I think, a very accessible, digestible, and frankly, just enjoyable. It's not a chore to read this, because it's not a picture book per se, but it's coffee table-esque and then some. How did you guys come to this format? And more importantly, how do you 2 come together, your backgrounds and stuff, to tackle this topic, which is probably a little overdue in terms of this kind of book form?
Well, thank you for the kind words, first of all. But this just really felt kind of serendipitous, I think, for both of us, that, both of us have been around the women's basketball space for a long time in various capacities. I'm more on the writing side. Jordan has also written, obviously, but does so much more on camera work and played in college herself. And I think both have always thought we would love to do any kind of book project around women's basketball, and just got kind of lucky that at the moment a publisher was looking for something like this, which I think we would agree, as you said, really is kind of overdue. Just something that is a more comprehensive history of the game, that's visual, that's engaging, that can kind of speak to a pretty broad base of readers. They thought of us. And so it was something where we were lucky to be in a position where we were approached. A publisher is interested in a women's basketball history kind of coffee table book, and they gave us those broad outlines, and then we could fill it in from there with everything we wanted, and to make it as fun, as engaging, as lively as we wanted it to be, like you were saying. And I'm so glad that came through. But yeah, it really just was kind of a magical, the way that it lined up with, they were looking for something like this, and we both had a lot of ideas on how it could actually come together.
And Emma, your background is journalistically focused mostly?
Yes, I kind of classic school paper in college, internships, and then I've been at Sports Illustrated for almost 8 years now.
Well, you're talking to somebody who interned at Sports Illustrated way back in, do I have to admit this, 1987, when it was Time Inc. owned and stuff. And I could tell you stories about Sports Illustrated, how it's evolved and maybe not and stuff, but it still carries a lot of weight for sure in the sports realm and stuff. So you're kind of in a lucky place to be there. Jordan, how about your background and how you came to all of this?
Ooh, how much time do we have? No, as a freelancer, I feel like my path is so windy to how I got here. But like Emma said, I played basketball in college. I've always been a super fan of women's basketball. I grew up in Sacramento. I was a Monarchs fan. I was there with my jersey and my Thunder sticks in grade school, cheering them on. So that was kind of my intro to the WNBA. But when I was in college, I actually didn't want to do sports journalism at all. I was in practice 6 days a week, and I was like, please do not make me write about basketball too. And somehow I found my way back. I was a fact checker at The Ringer, and I had a huge introduction to sports journalism through there. Got introduced to podcasting there as well, and just the power of storytelling. And so now I do writing. I have a podcast called The Women's Hoop Show on Audacy, and do on camera as well as a host. Works for Pac-12 Network as well, in their women's basketball space. I just like to say, if you give me a megaphone or anything, I'm going to talk about women's basketball in any way possible. So been able to make a living off of it. And it's been really, really fun to be able to kind of have all of that cultivate into a book, a history book like this.
It's interesting because the two of you almost juxtapose each other in terms of how the career path looks for sports and journalism, quote unquote, intersecting these days, right? There's the classic approach, right? You have the journalistic chops and the quote unquote newspaper, whatever that thing is anymore, or magazines, whatever those used to be, married with your sensibility, Jordan, which is obviously tends to be kind of less so, right? It comes more from having been a player and, a fan, and basically trying to describe those stories and find places to be connected to those and emanate those. But arguably those are kind of, it's the yin and yang, right? Because you need both of each other, so to speak, both as individuals, I'm sure, but functionally and from your backgrounds as well, right? Because in order to do anything storytelling worthy, right, especially in a book form, which is imagery, but also words and design is part of the mixture, and it needs to be accessible, from various levels of intelligence out there. It's like basically you've got both sides of the brain here, essentially kind of putting your heads together in this book. It's great.
Oh yeah. And it took both of us. It took both sides, all sides of our brains to put this together. And I think it was just so special to be able to work with Emma because she is so brilliant and such a incredible writer and storyteller. And it was fun to be able to piggyback off of each other and like bounce ideas off of each other and brainstorm on, from my experiences, what kind of moments stick out to me. Inside the book, she allowed so many Monarchs photos to be added in because that was totally me. And I was so biased in saying, like, I grew up the Battle of California and Monarchs and the Sparks. Like, that felt very important. And then she would add more ideas and we would just bounce off each other that way. And so I love that I had a partner in this because this is a huge undertaking to be able to talk about the history of women's basketball. So to be able to do it in tandem was so much fun.
Yeah, I think it really was just such a great pairing. And I know some people have nightmare co-writing experiences, but this really just could not have been more of a dream. And I can't imagine doing it by myself either. That I think having someone else to bounce ideas off of and go through it. And also, I think, like you said, Tim, someone who the strengths and weaknesses really complemented each other so well. Like Jordan is so much more visual than I am. She was in charge of our little like design layout board on Canva as we were going. And we had an incredible designer with our publisher, but like the way Jordan could visualize when I was like, here's 10 pictures and I've written 1,000 words, how is this going to look? The idea of actually being able to take that and have an idea of here's how it can look, here's what we should pitch, here's what we should frame the design conversations around is just not a skill I have at all. And I am so grateful that Jordan does and is really, really good at it too. So, yeah.
So walk me back a little bit into sort of how you frame this, right? Because in essence, you're talking about the quote unquote history of women's basketball, right? And until, I don't know, the last 25 years or so, 30 years, perhaps, I'm probably off by a couple of years. The reality has been mostly not of a professional variety, right? So, Jordan, I mean, your experience as growing up as a fan of the Monarchs in the Arco Arena of all places, and which is its own, a divot of intrigue because like it doesn't look like an arena, it doesn't feel like it was built out of a storage facility, whatever. But it's a whole other.
Yes, that is very accurate,
and I mean that lovingly, right? So. But I guess the point is that you've already expressed a whole generation of fandom and now professional coverage and stuff, right? And in some respects, right, the both of you are relatively fortunate to have grown up and started your careers in and around a professional environment. But it is, that was not even a thing in the 1980s, really. Well, it was more the exception rather than the rule. So how do you go back then and, I don't know, cement the beginnings, the origin story of women's basketball without being too, I don't know, musty and oldie right? Moldy oldie, because a lot of it is very historically rooted, lots of black and white pictures, and frankly, a story of collegiate acceptance, which was its own story, let alone the pros coming about later on.
Yeah, we had some really interesting conversations about how to frame those early chapters of basically just how much space do you give pre-1970, basically, where you have 80 years or so where the game is being played, but it looks different at every level. It looks different state to state. Like you said, it's a lot of black and white pictures. If you're trying to make this visually appealing, you really don't have a lot to go off of. And just kind of trying to balance, I think one of the things that we both found here is so much of that early history was really, really interesting. And there was also way more than either of us had realized that was, I guess I would say, quasi-professionalized in terms of barnstorming, in terms of even the, it sounds crazy to say, but the AAU obviously has amateur in the name, but at the time was mostly grown women who worked for companies, playing on company teams, kind of being paid under the table in a lot of ways. You have all of these examples of teams and of experiences that are certainly not professional as we think of it now, but are women who are playing in whatever capacity they can. A lot of them with really interesting stories, and we wanted to be able to include as many of those as we could while still balancing, when you're looking at the overall arc of the history here, you do tend a lot towards the college. You do then have to start paying a lot of attention to the first true professional leagues when you're getting into the 70s and 80s and what those looked like and everything that leads to the rise of the WNBA. So yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think we could have done it a million different ways, and I was happy with how we ended up doing it, but there are a lot of different moving pieces there in terms of how do you build out this history and balance all of those factors you're talking about when you're looking at everything that happens between 1882 and, let's call it 1972, when you really have the AIAW taking off.
But a lot,
For sure.
Go ahead, Jordan. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add that just following our genuine curiosity. I think that exactly what you said is spot on. We had those questions too. What did that look like before, our first memories of women's basketball, our first memories of the pro? What happened? What were they wearing? What were they doing? Were they just playing on the blacktop, or was it organized? And following those questions that we had ourselves was really the tipping point that started all the research for those chapters.
Well, I would also imagine too that in those decades prior to let's say the 1970s, right, which is certainly a watershed. We'll get to that. It's probably also an investigation into motivation, like why the passion for the game, how the barnstorming thing, probably also elements, I'm assuming, of overcoming prejudice and bias, both racially as well as gender wise, right? When basketball was evolving, on the pro side, largely as a male dominated corporate, factory off hours kind of thing. It's just an interesting diaspora of the quote unquote overall game, right? That's kind of developing too. And I guess the question there is there a I want to call it a caricature, but is there a definitional kind of makeup, if you will, of the typical female basketball player around this era? Like what is driving quote unquote her in the pursuit of this game that seemingly doesn't want to necessarily easily give women a home, so to speak, to play it?
I think one of the things that was so interesting about this research process is finding out that there really wasn't one single image, that you have black and white, you have high schoolers and young girls, and you have adult women, you have city blacktops, and you have like country farm girl, Midwest 6-on-6 basketball. You have all of that, and it looks a little different in each place, but you have some variation of the game thriving in all of these different places. Like one of my favorite chapters in the book, or favorite essays, is what Jordan wrote about ORMA Washington and the all black teams she was on and what that experience looked like. And then you compare it to some of the other versions you see throughout the decades of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. And it does look extremely different, but all of these women were playing.
Yeah, I think that hits it right on there. I think it was really fun to just see that the passion was the through line. The introduction was very different for so many players, especially when you get towards the 70s and players are able to get scholarships, athletic scholarships for basketball. That opened a whole new lane. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll try this out so that I can be a part of this and this new wave. And then there's a pro league in the WBL. Okay, I'll try this out. Like, it was very much this go with the flow because history was changing right before their eyes. But yeah, I don't know if there was this singular type of woman, but I love that the passion that they had for the game, that it could have come from their brother or watching the Harlem Globetrotters or from various other things. That's how it kind of started. So that was fun to see.
Talk about the collegiate game a little bit and sort of the lead up into what I would argue is the tremendous divining rod of the AIAW and the NCAA, right? Because in the 60s and early 1970s, right, there was a fledgling effort to kind of grow and expand and somewhat codify the women's version of the collegiate game, which is where a lot of the activity was. There was no pro league per se, and that kind of stuff. Can you kind of describe that sort of maybe pre-AIAW / pre-NCAA kind of world that an interested woman in basketball would be trying to navigate and or find their way to start playing?
Yeah, so it's something that looking throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, before there's really any kind of organizing structure at all, is just super free-flowing and loose, that some schools will have teams. Physical education departments were really big for women specifically, as in colleges, as this idea of like, this is the culturally sanctioned way for girls and women to like perform some kind of activity of, that a lot of those departments in colleges really emphasized, like, ladylike forms of movement. There was lots of gymnastics and horseback riding and variations of swimming. But you also had basketball as an increasingly big part of those. You had teams at a variety of schools that would kind of play neighboring schools casually. There certainly was no kind of larger infrastructure there. It really varied school by school, which colleges and universities had an actual team that felt more like a team and which didn't. And then you get to this really remarkable turning point, like you said, in the AIAW, which is the first real attempt at a governing body for women's sports in college, that at this point the NCAA has no interest in letting women play. Women are explicitly banned at one point. And so in response, you have the growth of this organization that I think poses a really interesting thought experiment, I guess, of what would it look like if you had women's college sports that are entirely designed by, run by, played by women. And they have some very different principles than the NCAA has. One right off the bat is that they want to really center the student and student athlete in a way that is both, I think, good and bad, that you could transfer at any time. There were no really recruiting rules because the idea was that, you're at college to be a college student and athletics are secondary. So you can approach a coach, you can say, I want to try out for this team. There's no recruiting pressure going the other way, which of course, leads to a very different makeup of teams, but it also creates a situation where students have a lot more freedom to be students and to kind of design their own college experience. That they wanted students to sit on some of the boards that they had, to be involved in the decision-making process for, here's how the sports calendar should look. Here's kind of the rules we should set. That's way earlier than you see that athlete involvement in the NCAA. You have it in the AIAW. And you have this attempt to really build this into a legitimate counterweight force to the NCAA. And basketball is at the center of that. That's the biggest sport. That's the sport where you see the most girls playing, the most colleges picking it up. The AIAW National Championship becomes the first to get on TV for women's sports. They have a deal with NBC. It's a huge deal, even though it's on tape delay. And you eventually get to this point where there's this kind of fascinating breakdown, I think, of the women in the AIAW saying, if we're going it on our own, we will never be as big as the NCAA. The best way to get good, serious treatment of our athletes as athletes is to join forces with the NCAA and have the NCAA admit women and let women play college sports alongside men as part of the same kind of programs and organizations with the NCAA versus a group of women who are saying, no, we can do this on our own. We should try to fight for our own space. And ultimately, of course, the NCAA wins in ways that I think were, tremendous, and not that the NCAA has a lot more resources. The NCAA has, just a lot to offer that the AIAW never could, but that also means kind of losing some of those spaces where you had separate women's athletics departments, meant women ADs, women coaches, women staffers, and a lot of those jobs just disappear and never come back to women, which is a very long-winded way of saying you have this really interesting decade of college basketball existing in a very different format than it would under the NCAA. And it all comes to head in 1 year where both organizations are hosting their own national championships. And it is a really fascinating set of questions about who are women's sports for and what is the best way to an environment where women are getting invested in and have the resources to really play the way they want to play.
I mean, look, it's really interesting that, in the early 70s even, there was even the friction. I mean, you could give the AIAW credit, right, for essentially corralling and putting rules and regulations in place for the entirety of women's sports in the college realm. To even get on the NCAA's radar. I mean, there's a lot of, it's almost entrepreneurial work, right? And then for the NCAA to kind of somehow wake up over that period of time. And I'd love to hear your opinions of how you look at Title IX's codification in the latter part later in the 70s, how much or how little of that was an impetus for the NCAA to stand up and take more interest in, and then arguably, work towards stealing away what the AIAW essentially had started from scratch.
Yeah, this was something that was interesting to me in doing some of this reporting and reading some of this research, of realizing just how long it took for Title IX to manifest in a way that was felt. Of talking to some of those early women's college players, it's like Title IX didn't make a difference to them, because if you're playing in 1975, even though it's already been passed and it's part of law, there's still this legal battle to go through. And so it took a while for the NCAA to realize what this was going to mean. There were several legal challenges. There was an attempt to have Title IX have a clause that would say, except for sports, basically, that like you can apply this to everything else, but just not this. And the NCAA actually pushed for that quite hard. And it really, that was one of the things that surprised me. I don't know about you, Jordan, just how long it took. That if you ask a women's college basketball player from 1975, what did this mean to you? The answer for everyone I talked to was nothing. Like, looking back, you could see administrators kind of starting to realize this might be something. But at the time, no.
Yeah, you think about it as it changed everything the next day. Like, after Title IX was signed, then everyone got a scholarship, or everyone was just admitted into colleges, because Title IX isn't just about sports. It is about all of academics for women, and not being able to exclude women from at college or anything like that. But another thing that I just wanted to add to this conversation was something that really stuck out to me through our research, through reading each other's work, was just how creative women got throughout every single decade. When there wasn't a way, when they were told or banned or told that there was no way, how they created something for themselves. And I think that AIAW is a great example of that. Even those early days in the NCAA, Title IX, the WBL, those pro leagues, just being able to create a space where they can thrive, and what that looked like. And they had highs and they had lows, so many, and throughout the history. And I think we do a great job of telling those great points, but also the low points in women's sports and in women's basketball. But I just love the creativity, and making a space out of no way is something that women have done throughout history.
What's interesting to me, as you say, and I think it's eye-opening, right, that indeed, aside from Ann Myers getting that first scholarship and all that kind of stuff, I mean, yeah, it did take a while. It did take events. It did take legal meandering to kind of get through the stuff. It did take the NCAA a number of years to kind of reverse their position against women's organized sports, to then all of a sudden be essentially interested in it and then wanting to have it all to themselves in the early 80s. But I guess then the reason why I'm double clicking on this in particular is because what's lost to me, and I'm sure you guys sort of figured this out, is this interesting and intriguing overlap of the WBL in the late 1970s, right? The WBL it was formed or founded in 1978, right? This is at least 2, 3, maybe 4 years before the NCAA's first ever women's basketball tournament was, right? So I wouldn't call the AIAW, prehistoric per se, but it was still the whole idea of women's collegiate sports was still very much in a maturation phase. And here we are now in 1978 with the arrival of a startup league for a pro game for women's basketball. So enlighten me a little bit as to the origin story of that, because I find that really fascinating, especially in hindsight. There wasn't a whole lot of, infrastructure, right? Collegiate infrastructure that would even arguably warrant a pro league at that early stage, right?
I think that's what makes it so cool. Is like these ladies were hooping so much that there was this excitement still around women's basketball. I think a lot of it, when you think about the WNBA and how the WNBA started with this excitement coming off the Olympics, right? And the women's basketball being put on the world stage. That was a lot from the WBL as well. Coming from the Olympic Games and women's basketball kind of having that first showing, then all the antennas go up and saying, how can we make money off of this? They're really good. This looks great. So that's kind of how the WBL gets started. And when I talk to some of those players who are part of those early days, they had talked about being kind of the first wave of those scholarship athletes. Elizabeth Galloway McQuitter, she told me, they were at UNLV and some of them had the very first basketball scholarships ever. And it was very much like, okay, what do we do now? Like, this was a good thing to be able to compete in college, whatever that looked like at the time. But it was such a question mark on what was next. I think overseas was still really the only other option, but here comes the WBL to have this entertainment aspect around women's basketball, not just the X's and O's or yes, it's a sport, but they very much tried to turn it into kind of going back to those barnstorming days with the All-American Redheads and the other barnstorming teams where this was an entertainment product and they are also playing basketball. But it gave these athletes a way to be able to continue to do what they love to do. And that was hoop. So the WBL gets started and, little rocky start per usual, entrepreneurial spirit, but they were able to get it going and build something really special. That is my favorite story that I wrote in this entire book, because the WBL players realized that it was for such a short amount of time that they were pro athletes in the United States in something like this. But without them, there is no WNBA, there is no ABL, there is no other professional league, like without their goods and the bads of that league. So they recognize that they kind of had to go through the mud. They had to go through the rocky start to be able to say that they are pioneers. And they weren't trying to be. That's what they say, accidental pioneers. We didn't want to be. We thought we were going to be in a league that was 40 years long. But it was just so special for them to share their stories about those early days and really find a home in a league that was made for them.
were the two of you just perplexed and surprised, given your relatively young age by comparison to yours truly, that this WBL actually existed? When did you and how did you discover this? And because I would imagine, you kind of scratch your head and go, wow, I didn't probably really know much about this. And sure enough, it was an effort and then some that soldiered on for a few years and certainly made a dent that probably took at least another decade or two to kind of show its import as the game essentially evolved over time.
Yeah, for me, this was something that I had seen as like a one sentence mention, that I had read enough about the history of the WNBA to have seen the one sentence of like there had been a previous attempt at a league in the 70s and 80s called the WBL. And I had always only ever seen it condensed into that. And it was just such a joy to realize how much more there is beyond that one sentence, that there is enough to fill a book on its own about this league. And I actually think one is coming, which is really exciting because they deserve it. And Jordan did most of the interviewing for this essay, but getting to read her work and getting to hear all of these women's stories and see their photos, the photos that they turned over. I'm sad we could only use the handful that we had space for, because it is so many amazing personal photos of everything they were doing and thinking and watching at that time and sharing with each other. And they just handed so many of them over to us because they have been wanting to share these stories. And the fact that I had only ever seen it before as like a one cursory mention before getting on to the WNBA and ABL makes me really sad in retrospect, because it is such a cool, interesting history.
Why do you guys think go ahead. I was going to say, what, and you can layer on, Jordan, but why do you guys think it took, why it lasted such a short period of time? I'm sure there are some obvious reasons, but there are probably some not so obvious reasons as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. With it being mentioned, I thought it lasted longer. Like even just the photos and the team names and hearing the legends of the ball, that's what they call themselves, hearing them talk about it, you think this is like they had 10-year careers, decade-long careers in this, but it was very short stint. Financial problems is probably the obvious one, but when I talked to a player like Molly Bolin, who was a superstar in that league and in that time, she really said that they were just right before a lot of things. Like they were right before ESPN. They were right before, the NCAA really blew up, and they were just kind of, the timing just wasn't right. And she just kind of talks about if this had happened, 5 years after, if it had happened 10 years after, with this type of enthusiasm and excitement around the league, maybe it would have been different. But right at the time that it started, it just wasn't made to last. And I think about that a lot for, everything happening through history. It happens at the time that it does for the reason in that moment. And for the players, that had felt like everything to them. Like it was, when they were in it, you couldn't tell them that it was only going to last 3 years. Like they had an all-star game. They felt like celebrities at some cities. Not everybody had that same type of pull, but I think about the time that it was, if it was pushed or delayed just by a few years, what that would look like. And I think that's what a lot of the players think about too, in retrospect.
We had a roundtable with Molly, with Liz, as well as Charlene McWhorter Jackson and Adrian Mitchell Newell. They're all part of the Legends of the Ball organization that you just mentioned. And Molly's been on twice actually, and it's I'm looking back at the episode description, and part of it is you could just see literally in just the numerous franchises that each of these ladies that went through, right? And not just the WBL, but also lesser spinoffs or diaspora of when it went away, like the LPBA or the WABA and these kinds of things. I mean, I think Liz Galloway McQuitter was like, I think she was the only one that stuck with one team, and I think that was only for a year or two. But I mean, we're seeing multiple teams and stuff. The sense that I really remember from that conversation, and I suspect that you kind of had the feeling of too, is that not that they would play for no money because they loved the game so much, but they did love the game so much, right? So I have to think that the 1970s, right? This is in the era of things like the World Football League and the American Basketball Association, which is having a moment now with the documentary on Amazon Prime, et cetera, right? And a lot of male entrepreneurs, maybe even hustlers, selling franchises first in promising sporting ideas, and maybe asking the financial questions later. I think Bill Byrne, the founder of the league, was a little influenced by that kind of, shoot from the hip kind of dynamic to get a league going, in this case for women's basketball. And, I don't know, dare I say, were these ladies maybe taken advantage of because their passion was so high that maybe the bounce check or two was, they kind of looked the other way a little bit and they were just more concerned about building something to sell later.
Yeah, I like how you put that in conversation with that time period in the ABA and the way that people were thinking about sports at that time, because I think there's such a thin line between what an owner or an investor can think of as a gimmick and what is legitimately a sport that an athlete is so passionate about. And you see this whole kind of spectrum here from the way that people talk about something like, in the ABA, the red and white ball and the 3-point line. And here, just the idea of women playing basketball at all, that means the world to them. That, like you said, that they wanted to be paid, obviously, and they needed to make a living, but they loved playing so much. That's also something that it was still such a relative novelty at that point that it could be spun by a team of all male investors and owners as a gimmick. That's something different that they see as something that's going to sell tickets and maybe get people in the door and hopefully they think pay off, which obviously is not really the mindset you want behind a long-term stable league. And clearly it wasn't here. But yeah, it is really just kind of I think very much a product of the 70s and the way that people were thinking about the opportunities in professional sports and just what can you do to sell and what does that look like? And they were lucky and unlucky in some ways to have gotten in the door there and then had to deal with the fallout.
Yeah, very much selling the dream. I think that's what it was. And especially with something like this that it had never been done before. You can be a part of history, come join. You don't have to go overseas. You don't have to leave your family. You can be close. There were a lot of selling points. And I think that's what made it a pretty easy yes for a lot of these players, especially with, like I said, when the other option after you just had a great collegiate career maybe was nothing. This is very appealing. And I think about it so much throughout the rest of women's basketball history. When I first heard about Unrivaled and Afisa Collier and Brianna Stewart, I was like, okay, that sounds amazing. Can't wait to see if it actually works. I think everyone is on edge because of something like this that has happened throughout history, especially with women's basketball, where maybe women's basketball players are taken more advantage of, especially by men who want to make money. Is it going to be over-sexualized? That's always another part of these leagues as well. So I think of Project B that's coming out. I'm like, okay, we'll see. That is always kind of with us because of what has happened throughout history.
Yeah, and look, and I guess progress comes in fits and starts too. And you mentioned the sexualization thing, right? I mean, we all know that Molly Boland story, right, was part and parcel of that, right? Which gets to who's really the fan for this too, right? I mean, right. And she was very forthcoming on this subject. It was just kind of it's kind of cool, and that's okay. She's got the sex symbol thing going there. It's not no publicity is bad publicity and that kind of stuff. And I'm sure some of the league owners didn't mind that, or having somebody along those lines that could sort of be a standout and maybe draw a group of interested fans from a more broader set of interests and stuff, if you will, knock on wood. But the reality also, too, is that, that's arguably what you don't want to be kind of putting out front and center, because it's really about basketball and the play and the strategy and the skills and that kind of stuff. And why are women being judged differently because of their looks versus, say, the men and all their doings in basketball, right? So, and sports generally, right? So that's all part of it, too, although it probably takes a little bit more time and maybe more money on the professional side to kind of really bring those things more to the fore. But I guess it's kind of hard not to look back at the WBL, especially since there was not so much video footage and certainly not a lot of television coverage, that kind of stuff. I don't want to say it sounds whimsical and full of funny stories, but I got to think it has a little bit extra sort of kick on that front versus maybe the harder stories that sort of lied under the surface. And we heard a little bit of it, but Pioneers, they often get marks or arrows in their backs, right? Because they're the first ones to do it.
Yeah. There's one advertisement we have a picture of in here for the Milwaukee Does. And I feel like it just captured that whole dynamic you were just talking about so well.
Totally.
Where, yes, they're like labeling it a sports first for Milwaukee, which is true and full of the idea that this was the first women's pro team in Milwaukee. And then you have the image of the titular Milwaukee Doe next to it, which is, the most over feminized deer you can imagine. It sounds crazy to say it's an over sexualized deer because how do you do that? But they clearly found a way to. With this deer has these crazy long eyelashes and is wearing these super short shorts and trying to dribble. And yeah, just that balance is you see it the whole way through. And I think it's really captured clearly in this league and in the WBL, but you see it the whole way through this history of that balance between, I think, really big questions of who gets to be the face of these leagues and of women's sports in general. And that's a question of, it's not just talent. It's like conventional sexual appeal. It's, race, it's sexuality. You see that all the way through in so many different ways. It manifests in a million different shapes and forms. And this is just, I think it really was captured so cleanly in those couple of years of what these women were trying to do and how it got portrayed by the people who were trying to make money off them.
Yeah. I was just going to say it's still happening. Shaq was just on Angel Reese's podcast saying, you are such a great basketball player, but if you wore booty shorts, then you would have so many more fans. Like, this is in 2025, this happened. So it is still very much a thing that, women's basketball has to constantly battle with. We are professional athletes and they were ballers and hoopers. And I would put my money on Molly Bolin over any other dude during the decade because she was just that good. But it's being diminished into one thing because at the end of the day, you are a woman playing basketball. So yeah, trying to figure out how to tell those stories, but also celebrate. This is definitely a celebration of women's basketball history. So wanting to shine a light on the positives as well. But yeah, that is very much there.
All right. So tell me why it took another 20 years or so for a legit pro league. And by the way, not one really, but kind of two, all of a sudden after what I would imagine would be a very dispiriting period of time for potential pro players in the women's game who, basically saw or knew that the WBL sort of came and went and really didn't have much more to go off of until the mid 1990s. Like, why two leagues all of a sudden, and why did it take that long, and why all of a sudden at that time? And
it's a really good question.
I mean, the ABL, and of course the WNBA at the time.
Yeah.
It's a really good question because it does seem pretty remarkable when you look at the way the college game grows, in terms of some pretty profound commercial success in terms of getting the TV positioning it does, growing what you see with especially Tennessee and UConn early 90s to mid 90s when you start getting the foundation for these leagues played. Tremendous growth there. The Olympic team being so successful, people talk about 96, but what they did through the 80s, that's a factor there too. Just the general growth of girls in sports that you see from that generation that does get to benefit from Title IX and what it meant to be, a 8-year-old girl, a 12-year-old girl, a 16-year-old girl, how different that was in the 80s and the very early 90s compared to 20 years before. It does seem it's still kind of really striking to me that no one saw the potential here, even if they had just been a few years earlier, starting this in the early 90s rather than the mid 90s. I think that there probably was space to make something like this, and it just didn't happen. And I think because you had such a total vacuum there for so long, you had so many college players who graduated and then just had nothing to do except go overseas and know that the only time that they could play, in any kind of venue where American fans would see them was the Olympics every 4 years. It was such a vacuum that it's not surprising that you had two groups who thought they could start making a league in 95, 96, getting ready to launch in 97. Uh, but it is surprising that it took that long, I think.
Yeah, well, I think too that like a lot of fledgling sports, right? They look at the Olympics, and this is still a strategy today, right? Where, like in the case of 96, right? Pretty darn good chance that they were going to go all the way and win the gold medal, given the amount of talent that was on the team. But you also had, the Connecticut Huskies had I guess they had a perfect record championship season that year or the year before that, around that time. And there just seemed to be kind of a belief amongst probably those two sets of entities, the NBA being one of them, right? That, there might be something to draft off here. And, and we've seen this time and time again in other sports in the 60s and the 70s. Not just one entity has the idea. It's also fascinating because you see, the college player basically seeing two leagues coming out of nowhere. Automatically, it becomes a bonanza, I think, for that number of players coming out of that kind of heat for the game.
Yeah, they had options. That was something they didn't have before, especially coming out of college, and not just anybody. These are the top players coming from these top, programs and national championship winning programs. You had options to stay in the United States and play. And, the Olympics we just experienced it with the Winter Olympics recently. All eyes are on the Olympics, on sports that typically maybe don't get a lot of love. And women's basketball is one of those things. They were so dominant and had superstars on that team that people just couldn't look away. And also another opportunity to potentially make money on this rise in popularity. And that's where kind of these two leagues spring up with the ABL and the WNBA. My little tidbit that I always love when I say this is, the ABL has so many parallels to Unrivaled now. It was very player first. Jennifer Azzi really led that by signing on, and they said, we want it to be around the players. We're going to start teams that already have fan bases from our players. So Jennifer Azzi went to Stanford. We're going to have a team in San Jose, and Teresa Edwards went to Georgia. So we're going to have a team in Atlanta, and really capitalizing on their fan base from college already to hopefully make that transition to the pros easier. Whereas I think the WNBA went the NBA approach, and they said, we're going to go big cities first. And with NBA teams already there's a fan base for basketball already. So we're going to start there. It's very interesting how those two approaches kind of went, and how more of the better players, quote unquote, went to the ABL. They were offering more money, more benefits, stock options right off the bat. And the WNBA was kind of offering it's all shiny over here. We got Nike involved, and we have a TV contract, and the NBA is involved, which made it more legit for the long run, and more appealing to players to go sign with the WNBA. But there was just this interesting fork in the road that you had options, but eventually it all came into the WNBA when the ABL folded. But yeah, I love that tidbit of how they started and the different approaches, even though it was at the exact same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole generation of fan that doesn't even realize that the ABL was a thing for a couple of years, let alone the WBL for that matter, right? But it's important, right? Because people forget exactly what you just said. I mean, the bulk of, I think, the Olympic team was to be found in the ABL. And, the WNBA, I think, was mostly looked upon more as marketing muscle first. And clearly that from a long-term perspective certainly didn't hurt. But, in terms of playing the game, with the quality players and stuff, the ABL certainly had at least an early advantage and stuff. But to not remember that, right? I mean, we all now look at the WNBA, and we'll sort of, fast forward to this now, right? We're in a world now that, 29 plus years later, this is a league that certainly has had its ups and downs. It started pretty aggressively, and pretty hot, came in hot. There were a bunch of lean years in the middle there. There were teams that got contracted, some of which are coming back, apparently. Portland Fire coming back, right? After three, I think it's the Fire, right? 3 very nondescript years in the early years. But they're all, not only those franchises that, did not wind up making it in the WNBA, but to not remember the contributions of the ABL players and teams and folks involved, as well as that of the WBL. I mean, on the backs of pioneers, a thriving WNBA today, and things beyond that, like Unrivaled, exists today. Would you guys have ever imagined, or perhaps in particular, Jordan, you as a fan watching the Monarchs, which sadly don't exist anymore in Sacramento? Do you ever pinch yourself and go, wow, this is, and all these expansion franchises and stuff that, and all the money that's coming in now. Could you ever imagine that as a kid, that it would be kind of the juggernaut that it kind of is right now?
As a kid, I mean, it was the biggest thing in the world to me. Like, I didn't even realize that, there were some games that half of Arco Arena was empty. I didn't realize that until I go back and look at pictures, because I was in the thick of the cheering section, and I was with my teammates. And for me, it was very much like, oh, I'm going to the WNBA. Like, this is all that I know. This is an option for me. I'm for sure going to the league. Now, I stopped growing at about 6th grade, so that wasn't going to be real for me anymore. But I think it was very much, this is happening. This is like the best thing in the world. So even to me as a kid, when I had to learn the news that I can't go to Monarchs games anymore, I was so angry. I was like, wait, I don't understand. They just won a championship. Like, how many championships have the Sacramento Kings won? Like, I knew that even as a 5th grader. That didn't make sense of why the women's team had to leave and not the men's team. So I remember my dad having to explain that, and that it was money and it wasn't bringing in a lot, and sometimes this happens. So I think from that moment to now, and seeing that there are going to be young girls in Cleveland and Philly that has never had a team, and in Portland, maybe their moms who grew up watching the Portland Fire and going to those games, now they can bring their kids to Portland Fire games. This is all, it was all, little pieces throughout history that brought us to this moment. And I think that was the whole reason for us writing this book, is that all of this excitement that's happening now didn't happen overnight. And it is a slow drip of opportunities that have failed and succeeded to be able to get to expansion fees that are millions of dollars going towards the WNBA, and them having to turn people away from wanting to have WNBA teams because everyone wants to get in on it. It's exciting. It feels new, even though it's been around for 30 years. But it is exciting, and it is a pinch me moment to be able to, one, cover this and be in women's basketball full time. The fact that my job even exists and I can make a living off of covering women's basketball is also on the backs of so many reporters and people who were doing it for less than nothing. So yes, it is a pinch me moment through and through.
I think it is just interesting. It's hard to say, with all of the ups and downs of the last 20 years, and also shifting from the little kid experience of like, I like this and I can see this, so it's must be as important to everyone as it is to me. And then kind of going through that period of disillusionment of like, like that really is not actually how the world at large views women athletes the way that I do as my like starry-eyed 6-year-old self. And my version of this was actually with soccer. I grew up in the Triangle of North Carolina, and the league before the NWSL, the first women's pro soccer league that came out of that,
WUSA, right?
yeah, WUSA, that came out of that 99 World Cup. One of their teams, the original Carolina Courage, we had season tickets. I was obsessed and had the same thing of how can this not exist anymore? It's like, this is everything. Yeah, it just has changed so much so quickly. I think that's what has surprised me the most, and I think is something that I would have been more pessimistic about, let's call it 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, frankly, of I believe that the groundwork was there and that there was kind of a cultural moment coming where this could become more stable and this would start growing the way that I had really always believed it could, if given the right investment and time and the right conditions to get the right eyeballs. I didn't think it would change so much so quickly. And that's been obviously really pleasantly surprising, but that is the one area that I don't think I was optimistic enough in retrospect of just seeing how much truly transformative change could happen in just a few years.
Now that's really both of you. It's really, I mean, personally, very intriguing as you grew up as kids, being sports fans and stuff. And look, that's an those years, your pre-adolescent years, especially, are very, if you're into sports, right? That's where the impressions really come. That's frankly how this show got started. I was abandoned as a child by the North American Soccer League, which is even before your time. The New York Cosmos, which was a hot thing for a couple of years on the planet in soccer, and then all of a sudden they and the league went away. It was like, well, what's this all about? What just happened here? But I can't let you two go though without kind of giving me a little bit of the hot take thing on kind of where we find the women's pro game now, inclusive of Unrivaled for sure. It's its own thing, but the WNBA in particular. And I guess maybe against the relief of pro sports generally right now. I'll just throw out a couple of theses here. Number one is this, the collective bargaining thing is the clock is ticking. It's a mature league problem now, right? Which in some respects is also part of that growth, and that success is now the money's bigger and the players have more voice and all that kind of stuff. And there are bigger things at stake now to get those things right. And I guess second I'll throw out there as another thesis is this general influx of cash. I mean, you mentioned, Emma, about, within the last 5 years or so, I think one of the biggest accelerants of that has been money, right? I mean, and gobs of money in a very short period of time from lots of new sources, both on the retail front with gambling and betting and all that kind of stuff, and sponsorship stuff, but also private equity and foreign investments. And it's now an asset class, pro sports, right? And probably the women's sports is probably still the more undervalued and maybe in many people's minds look like the better investment from a return perspective. So now that I've layered my thoughts on it, I'd love to hear yours, but those are two themes that kind of rattle around in my head, is sort of the big girl problem, if you will, now of a league that is in a new level of its success and all the thorny things that come with that, as well as the money thing. Are we getting a little too ahead of ourselves with 18 franchises, et cetera, going forward?
I think one of the great things about the position it's in now is the league can afford to be somewhat selective. That I think for the longest time, there is this perspective that both players individually and women's professional basketball as a whole didn't have the luxury of choosing between investors or choosing with how really to chart a course. It was kind of just the situation where whatever they had to do to exist as a going concern was what they were going to have to do. And I think to be in a spot where that's no longer the case, where they can be strategic about how they decide to move forward, is no small thing. And I think just seeing how that frames what they do moving forward, that like you don't have to accept every investment bid. You can be choosy with where you expand and when you expand and how you do that timeline. Although personally, I feel like they went too long without expanding. And that it's really exciting to see them being a little more aggressive there than they had originally said they were going to, and not just doing a drip, drip, drip of one team every 2 years, but really pushing the gas there. But yeah, when you're talking about how this can be viewed as a more speculative asset by external money, including from, foreign investors, we see Saudi money in the sport. We see the potential for private equity to come in as with ownership stakes. You've seen more of that in the NWSL, which has opened the door. I think the fact that you can be a little choosy, that you can decide that this sport is successful enough now to decide how you want to chart a course, is a really remarkable, inflection point all its own, that they have the luxury of choice now. And, I hope that they use it wisely.
Mm-hmm. I always think about, one, because we wrote a book on the women's basketball history and how history tends to repeat itself. And so I totally get why the WNBA has waited so long, or I feel like the past 5 years, all the questions for the commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, has been, when are we going to expand? Are you going to do 5 teams? Are you going to do all of them at once? What cities? And the WNBA at the beginning, when it first started, they did that. They expanded very quickly. And then there were so many teams. And then you have things like Houston Comets, who won the first 4 championships folding, or the Monarchs, or Cleveland, Detroit winning championships and having to be moved to different. So I can see how that is a little bit of PTSD for a league to be able, and for fans to say, okay, do I want to get excited about this, or are they just going to leave, or are they going to fold, or are the NBA money that's so excited now, are they going to leave again? Because they were some of the first people to leave when it got rough in 2004, 2008. So I totally get that. But I think the way that this new money that's coming in, and how the league, this time right now, I don't feel like we are even stressing it enough. It is so important. This CBA is so important. How the league decides to move from this point on can really set the precedent for the future, for all of these college stars, for the NIL conversation. Like, there's just so much that's at the center of what the WNBA decides to do. And when we talk about options, the WNBA can't work on the model that they are the only option anymore. That's how it has been for so long. Being able to say that you play in the WNBA is it. And I know that just as a freelancer, I feel like people have their rates have been a little lower just because you have the name of the publication to be able to add to your bio, right? And I think that's how the WNBA has been working. Those days are over, and the league has to understand that there is other competition, that professional athletes have other options, they have other ways to make money, and it is not just the shininess of the WNBA. And I hope over these next couple of weeks specifically that the league comes to an agreement to pay these players, and to really set the precedent on professional women's sports and what that's going to look like.
You agree, Emma? You think? What do you think the prognosis is, you two, for that coming together correctly? Because it seems like there's a lot of, I don't know, a PR game going on right now that doesn't look promising at this moment, or maybe that's just part of the game at this point.
I think it's something you see in every pro sports CBA negotiation, where I do think both sides are fairly dug in at this point, but I don't think that means that I certainly don't think we're at risk of losing the season. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a brief work stoppage, but I think there still is enough time for both sides to make movement here that, I think you see it in other CBA negotiations. A lot can happen really, really quickly when the clock is at, 2 minutes to midnight. And I think that both sides here really do grasp this is a really pivotal agreement, a really important season to the welfare of the league long term. Mm-hmm. And I think they both know that. And I think there's going to be movement. I think I'm perhaps too optimistic there, but I really do think, we've seen some movement in recent weeks, and I think there will be more, even if it doesn't happen until, right at that March 10th self-imposed deadline or the days after, which, I think another great thing about knowing the history here of going through a book like this is that they've been in a situation before where they had to have things come together very quickly. The 2003 CBA, they had 2.5 weeks to do a dispersal draft because franchises were shuttering, the college draft, and start training camp. And they got it all together in the span of a couple of days because they got to the agreement so late. But they did reach an agreement. And I think that's going to be the case here too, although in a much more positive situation than 2003, because this one is about having enough money to be able to make a case for really fundamentally changing things rather than the opposite.
I'm crossing my fingers over here, Tim. That's all I got for you.
Curl your toes while you're at it too. Sure.
Yeah, please. And my puppies. I'm just hoping. Like Emma said, I think everybody realizes the moment is big. And if we have the draft, a couple days later than we were originally planned, then that's okay. But I think it's just going to be so fun when we're all at the Final Four, me and Emma, and we're watching this incredible game. And then there's going to be free agency news, and then there's going to be trades, and we're all our computers are just going to explode because all of it's going to be happening at the same time. But what a fun place to be, and what a great thing to do for work.
And ladies, I thank you very much. This has been great. I share your I marvel at your enthusiasm. I share your optimism to a point. But it's also very interesting too to see. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. There are definitely other options that seem to be solidifying, and Unrivaled is certainly one. We've seen Athletes Unlimited with its capabilities for sure. I think in many respects, all of this is a sign of success, but it's also part of growing up too, and. I too agree that it's imperative to get it right because so much has been built. And you said it before. I think, Jordan, you said this. I mean, it seems like this league is still kind of new and fresh, even though it's almost 30 years old. That's actually not a bad kind of position to be in because it implies that there's just so much more ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. I hate when people compare the WNBA to the NBA because we're in our 30s while, the NBA is nearing their 80s. And the amount of growth in that 30 years, I think a lot of people can say, well, there's so much more that needs to be done, but look how far it's come. And to be able to even say that it could potentially be celebrating the 30th season, the longest running, professional women's sports league right now, is a huge accomplishment. And I don't want it to stop there. What a time to press pause. All of the momentum is in their favor. And so we just want it to keep thriving.
All right. Delightful to no end. Thank you to both Emma and to Jordan. I cannot more highly recommend this book called Court Queens, Celebrate the Players, Teams, and History of Women's Basketball. It is published by our friends at Black Dog and Leventhal Publishers. And you can get it either in pre-order form, if it's before the 17th of March when you listen to this show, or afterwards, where it's available now, wherever good books are found. You can find, though, of course, convenient links to purchase the book in the show description or on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Search up this episode number 436 with myself, Emma, and Jordan, and you will find convenient links there. And our affiliate friends at Amazon will give us a couple of shekels of referral love and you the book as quickly as humanly possible. Let's see. You can follow and find out more about these two ladies on their websites. They're all over social media too, but go to their websites. You'll find out the locus for all that stuff. They've got link trees and stuff too. So Emma's website is emmabaccellieri.com. I'll spell it for you. EMMA. Baccellieri is BACCELLIERI. emmabaccellieri.com. Kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Yeah, sure. And also Jordan's website is Jordan Robinson. Jordan is Jordan, jordanrobinson.media. All right, so there you go. You got their two websites. Follow their various socials. And you can also check them out in various places. They're going to be in person promoting the book. A couple of places now to tout. You can also just check their social feeds for other dates. March 17th, they'll be in New York City at Wilka's. On March 20th, they'll be in Sacramento at the Guild Theater. On March 28th, they'll be in Los Angeles at Untamed Spirits. You can meet Emma and Jordan on April 7th in Chapel Hill, North Carolina at Flyleaf Books. And of course, in the great burb of Brooklyn on April 9th at DSK Brooklyn. Check them out. Tell them that you heard about them here. Buy a copy or two or seven of the book. And maybe take a picture and send it to us too. Take a great group photo there and just let us know that you kind of got connected because of the show. We'd love to hear that. Let's see. All right, we're going to give away a copy of this book as I promised earlier. And again, we're going to give this to the first two correct answerers to this trivia question. We timestamped them. All you got to do is send the correct answer to this question to our website's email address. And that is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And here is that question. The American Basketball League, we talked about it. Their first season was in 1996. It lasted for 2.5 seasons. And it was really the first and probably the best for a short period of time women's pro league until the WNBA came and, I wouldn't say messed everything up, but certainly, made things a little more interesting. What was the team that won the only titles in the history of the American Basketball League? For background, this league lasted 2.5 years, so there were only 2 championship seasons. But one team won them both times. What was the name of the team that won both American Basketball League championships in 1996-97 and 1997-98? What was the name of the team that won the 2 ABL championships? There's only one team that won it twice. You could say they were a juggernaut in the short life of the ABL. hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. First 2 answers correctly get the book, and we're happy to have that opportunity. Also happy to have you listening on a regular basis. Our website, again, goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can follow us on various socials. You'll find us on the Twitter X thing at goodseatsstill. You'll find us at on the Blue Sky thing at goodseatsstillavailable.com, and just about everywhere else at goodseatsstillavailable, all one word, including YouTube, where we post all of these shows as well. Thank you to Jerry Payne for his audio excellence again this week, and thank you for listening. It's been 9 years. As of this week, this is our 9th year of doing this nonsense. Thank you for listening and supporting, and we got plenty more to go. We're not done yet. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.